Hello, esports fans, and in particular Counter-Strike fans. Welcome to Rivalry's Counter-Strike channel. I'll be doing a bunch of interviews for Rivalry.com over here, and hope you'll certainly follow them. And we thought we'd start with a banger. Of course, it's a colleague, Duncan Thorin Shields. We do a podcast together, and we typically throw in an interview where we either one will interview the other pretty much once a year. Seems to be the regular time for updates. I think we haven't done it for a while, honestly, Duncan. I think it's been like maybe two.
Sure.
Since we've sort of sat down and done a long talk about our respective careers. But I think it's an interesting one right now because of where we are. Like, esports has definitely changed quite a lot over the past 2 years. And you've been in the middle of that, those changes, in a variety of roles. So first of all, I just want to start with a very broad question. How do you kind of feel about the current esports landscape and where you're positioned within it?
It's certainly very interesting because I still have a hard time myself figuring out where we are in sort of like the graph line. Like, is this actually about to go into an even bigger upswing? Is it going to actually like level out for a while and take a big hit, and maybe monetization issues, is my guess, that seem way behind the pace of where the industry wants to present itself as. I could see that like setting us back a few years. So I think probably the most interesting thing for myself is, I think what the difference from past times when there's been a bubble feeling and there's either been a reset or you've gone to a higher level is like the media side of it has leveled up so much that people like you and me can have an actual direct impact on this. We can be voices in the community that we weren't necessarily before. So I think it's actually in some ways the most thrilling time of my career, like the most opportunities available to me. Obviously lots and lots of ability to, on a quite a low-fi level, to do anything I want myself on my own channel through many different mediums, but at the same time, because you never quite know which way the industry is going to go next. The problem I have is I always know what to do with, like, I can assess the current situation. This makes sense for me to do, maybe skip that. It's really hard to be trying to guess ahead of the curve, though, which is obviously, by the way, right now, how you can make a lot of money in about 5-10 years. You could be incredibly rich if you can pick the right companies to partner with, get equity with them, do a project that's something revolutionary. There's a lot of opportunity for that sort of thing out there. So I still do my own thing day to day, still always journalism, still love the same games, love to watch them in the same way, just enjoy the 2019 version of Counter-Strike in the same way I probably enjoyed the 2015 version. But I do think business-wise, there's potentially some different ventures for me on the horizon that I hadn't really considered before.
Well, you sort of did that a little bit because, I mean, you're primarily known for Counter-Strike, but, you know, you jumped into League of Legends when I wouldn't have said necessarily that game would have spoke to you. You know, I always think you as an esports purist, so I always kind of figured that Dota would have been more your thing because, you know, generally you're somebody that focuses on the high skill esports, the highest level. You know, you were a Quake guy before you were a Counter-Strike guy. That's the kind of pedigree that you're interested in. But, you know, a lot of people said your association with the league was kind of cynical in that sense, that it was just happened to be the most popular esport, so you were there. And then obviously you tried to get ahead of the curve on Overwatch too. So talk a little bit about that then. Sort of at which point does getting ahead of the curve sort of become like a cynical exercise? And to what degree you are legitimately interested in those esports? Because it seems quite genuine. I see you tweeting about them all the time.
Sure. Well, one of the things I found about a game like League of Legends is, it doesn't at all have any sort of inherent quality that calls to me. Like I often say to people, because it is literally what happened, if there were 10 games that were all, I'd say what they called back then, Dota clones, like I wasn't really that interested in Dota itself. And even then, the ones based on the ones my initial experiences, I would have, if I'd been playing the game, probably played Hon and then probably Dota 2. That's probably my kind of route because, like you say, if you come from the lineage of being from Quake, it's basically all about the game being as hardcore and as difficult as possible. And usually actually quite like beginner unfriendly is almost like a hallmark. You almost want it to be where there aren't just a million plebs all trying to get into the game. So that's not League at all. League is I'd say it's characterized as the exact polar opposite of that. It's pretty much the game where I actually think the different business model they've been able to succeed on is you don't have to retain all the people playing your game. As long as the turnover involves enough new people coming in the door, it can be the equivalent of your game being a summer popcorn movie where it makes all the money off people coming in. It doesn't matter if it's classic. It made all the money that day, you know. So I feel as though the interesting thing was the initial reasons for going into League were a little bit cynical. Like, I remember I can always justify each individual action. Like, for example, the first interview I did was because it was a play with Snoopy when I was at SK, and he was in SK itself. So that's one where it's like someone I've already talked to outside of the context of his game. He has a similar background to me from the UK. I know he plays for a team that I've worked with. Why not ask this guy to do an interview? And then the idea was, yes, when I saw the response and the hits, because I think the key thing and the interesting part for me about League is it showed me how the modern generation of esports are going to have a really hard time, I think personally, staffing their games with really good content creators, because there's some sort of a logic I noticed that everyone in the business side of esports uses, which is they act as though everyone's like an ant in an ant colony and you can just scale things up and down. And I've heard this argument so many times with specific games for like which region should be the best. Like, you know, it's an excuse the North Americans always give when they're not the best at a game. Like, oh, we don't have that many people playing the game. It's like, mate, there's not like a threshold that you hit where you just get a simple born in your country, you know, like that doesn't necessarily happen. So the interesting thing for me overall is League is one of the only games I've seen where it's been able to go truly global, but at the same time, it's been ripe the whole time for journalism. Like there hasn't been that much stuff. It's basically all been the equivalent of really, really nerdy, like Anorak train spotter level people who listen. I love the stuff they do, but it's never going to translate to the masses. Like they just don't have the charisma, they don't have any of the packaging or polish. Or it's the people who are only the surface stuff and they can get you the very basic interview with a guy and ask the questions that, I would want to know if I was just like a casual fan of that team. But like, where's the in between? Because to me, when I watch sports, that's what I want to hear. I want to see the discussion shows for the latest topics. I want to see some in-depth stuff. Like I love it when, you know, they do a television broadcast from a big sports event and they have the feature where it's very highly produced. So for me, the main reason to get into League is that whole area. My entire lane basically was just wide open. And I remember when I first came in, actually, I tried to reach out to some of the people who were doing things like it was called Leaguepedia at the time. Some of the people I thought are kind of in my kind of lane. None of those people had any interest in doing actual like public front-facing journalism. They just wanted to keep doing little databases and just stuff on the side. So I think for me, what I found in that game was I just like the community aspect of it. I think it's got a nice setup because of all the different regions that play it. It's got so much potential in terms of content you can create. And yes, it's definitely a massive boon that it's basically probably the highest earner, I think, if you're talking about raw hits, which then presumably should translate into some sort of monetization at some point.
Yeah, I mean, with League, I always thought it was interesting that, I mean, you know, I don't understand. I mean, it's true in Overwatch. It's true in Overwatch as well. I don't understand why developers can't put their ego aside and basically allow sort of more controversial, iconoclastic figures to come in and create content, because it seems like it's a win-win. Because, you know, those figures, you know, it would be like if the if the NFL put their foot down and said, like, listen, we're not going to cooperate with any network that allows Skip Bayless to talk about football, or
sure,
you know, why would they do that? I mean, like, whatever the pros and cons of a Skip Bayless type figure are, he's box office. He's got a proven tenure, you know, across many decades of putting out the kind of content that people will gravitate towards, even if it's because they hate him. Right? Like, you know, it's like the old Howard Stern effect.
I've always even thought the part that was always lost to me was there should at least be sort of a subtle wink and nod from even the people who criticize, like famously LeBron. If I'm LeBron, I love Skip Bayless. He has my name in the bloody news every day when I'm not even the story. Like, he'll be comparing me to whoever the other player he's talking about. It's like, that's actually brilliant for LeBron, I always thought.
Yeah, so you end up with this kind of, you know, this tier where it's basically like, you know, you get guys like Travis who are occasionally critical, Travis Gafford, in case nobody knows what I'm talking about, you know, who are occasionally critical, but generally they know what side of the line they want to stay on. They never want to do anything too challenging to Riot, too challenging to teams, because they want to get the content, because they want to make a living. And then you get people, you know, like you and me, who to a large degree are persona non grata. You know, we had that story recently with Riot Games. Well, they literally prevent you from going on a fucking broadcast. You know, they literally stop you from going on a broadcast, which I think would have been great and great for the scene because you've been a big part of it, you know, love you or hate you. But they simply will not allow you to be officially recognized. Same with my reporting. They won't officially recognize all the many times I've exposed something that they need to fix for competitive integrity, and I basically have done all the groundwork for their investigation for them. And that when they publish their findings, they go, our findings, our report has found this, will never be officially recognized. And I think it's very bizarre that they take that stance, especially with someone like you, because you always worked so closely alongside, people who were at the top, like Monte Cristo, who you work with still now in Overwatch.
I think you could even argue, especially in League, I've helped sort of, as they say in the hip hop community, put on a lot of people in their fucking game,
Absolutely.
giving people, a platform to initially get known, to address regions maybe they don't yet work in, but would like to one day. Again, I'm not saying it to blow my own horn. I add those people on because they were all brilliant. Like, I'm very glad they accepted the invitation to become a guest on those shows. But yeah, I would agree. I thought, I'll probably never think of myself as a League of Legends guy. I've spent too much time in the other games, and luckily for me, Counter-Strike was there the whole time and it hasn't gone away. So I can kind of keep that as my core identity. But yeah, I feel as though I've been in the scene a long time now. If you just look, I've always thought the idea that like giving opinions people don't like, not outrageous opinions that are like, hateful things just opinions people don't like. Even the person who doesn't like that surely must acknowledge you contribute something to the community for other people, right? Someone else likes that podcast. Someone else likes that show. Someone else likes that content. So it has always puzzled me how it's been easy to sort of consign some of us to like outsider status, and we can sort of never be considered a part of the scene, partly because the game developer that basically rules the game, like bloody Julius Caesar or something, won't give up any of the power, won't sort of share the spotlight in a sense. Because if you look at their game, this is why, in a sense, I didn't like the way it went down. But one of the reasons I'm very glad that Monty is not in that game anymore is my friend Monte Cristo, who's obviously in Overwatch now, mate, they miss him so much in that game. It's unbelievable. Like, they are crying out for what he used to do. Even the people on the LEC broadcast who have a little bit more like leash and they can kind of like do some banter, it isn't the same. Like, the good thing was, because the Riot game was so buttoned up with everyone else, it actually meant that Monty balanced their desks out perfectly. You could have the one guy who was just saying whatever he really thought, and even if it went counter to the fans' narrative and who they were supposed to be cheering for, there's a guy who could do that. And in doing so, this is the part they never understood, it seemed. That then allows the others to be all spotlessly clean and always saying the right thing and never making the naughty joke, etc. Because the other guy balances. So I've always thought, people like me, it doesn't have to be me. There's plenty of people who are mates, man. LS, local, these people could all do a similar role as well. But if you notice, Riot, this is why I'm bringing those people. It's not just me. There is a pattern, a consistent pattern, that Riot does not want those people involved. If they can, they won't even acknowledge them initially. If some other person gets their foot in the door, often through being a player, going to a different region and casting, they just try their hardest not to acknowledge them. Like, it was quite famous, even when Korea was the best region in League of Legends, that it would only be Monty and then maybe Doa who went, and then maybe Papa. Like, if you were the other guys working there, you are just chopped liver. Like, meanwhile, if you're like the 7th down the bloody line, coming down the fireman's pole to do LCS, you might be doing Worlds Finals. Like, it's outrageous the way they even kind of like treated the outsiders there, because obviously the people doing like the Korea desk, for example, initially weren't actually contractors. Well, they weren't employees, right? They were just contractors. So even within the company and who they'd acknowledged, there was still a tiered system. So I've always felt as though anyone who kind of goes against I just call it a Disney-fied narrative of League of Legends and what it is as a game and what it's trying to represent, and even what the competition seems to mean, is kind of pushed out or marginalized. I don't think it's just me. I think I'm just an obvious example, because I think it would have been quite seamless to just bring me in some context, even if it had been in some very unique one entirely,
And then obviously we've kind of seen, I think Overwatch, and this is my perception, but I don't create content for Overwatch, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's worse in Overwatch. I think they really absolutely do not have a stomach or capacity to sort of deal with any form of contrarian, difficult opinions, adult opinions, actual criticism that isn't sort of tempered by, some platitude. And therefore, I imagine doing a podcast with the likes of you and Monty, it should be essential viewing, but I think there's some people that resist on it. For example, the criticism I see Monte Cristo get for just simply saying this team plays poorly, or this team, should change this, or this team's bad, or this region's bad. It's like, that's the job of a sports pundit. And yet these people say, "Oh, Monte Cristo, is problematic for doing this, and he shouldn't be allowed to do it, and we're going to boycott watching this and that." It just seems like utter madness to me. It's like sports but for kids, and you were trying to create adult content, but unfortunately, it's majority children that get to sort of judge it and judge whether it's successful or not. I mean, that's my external perception.
Oh, that's a big problem with that. Like the saddest thing I think for me about Overwatch is, as I say, I was never like a person who I don't bleed League of Legends. Like if League of Legends dies out as a game tomorrow, cool. I'll say we had a few good years. I'll move on to something else. And if I'm lucky, maybe it'll be a game I actually enjoy even more. So when Overwatch first came out, and I already knew, obviously from behind the scenes, Monty was going to be a caster in the game. He was going to go hard at it. It was a logical thing to transition doing a show in that game.
Sure.
And give it a best, the college try at the beginning. And the problem is the game itself has elements, because it's FPS, that I do enjoy very much. Like I think when people pop off in that game, it looks 10 times better than League of Legends, where even to this day, I sometimes do have to almost like shake my head like, that is absolute garbage what looking at a team fight looks like, even if it's the best team in the world. What is this shit like? Like imagine trying to compare that side by side with like some of the basketball player doing a 360 dunk, or, some amazing tennis shot down the line. Like there's no intuitive pop from a game like League of Legends. You have to know the information like demand is just too much to even get into the basics of what's happening. So Overwatch I actually thought was primed in many ways to be great, but the problem Overwatch has is it can't be a coincidence that the games that have the most hardcore community are all FPS games traditionally. Even in the modern day, Call of Duty's right up there with Counter-Strike as more the edgy game, for people who are the more like gamers. It's not for the pure plebs, even though obviously that game has its own commercial side. The problem is Overwatch is that type of game, but then because they've draped it with all the bloody Disney style, like cartoon graphics, and then for some bizarre reason that I can understand, because sadly I know they've just hired people who've done this, but as an outsider, it's absolutely alien as a concept to me that the people you would politically try to align yourselves with are basically people who, as far as I can tell, a defining characteristic that unites them all is they hate gamers and people who play games like esports games, and esports games just like FPS games like Overwatch. Like imagine in an FPS game where there's any kind of a humanoid character being killed, trying to promote the game to people who believe words are problematic and violent. Like, this is madness. This is a fool's errand on the level, like, I can't even imagine what they're like. As far as I can tell, the only analogy, I'll give you an old school movie analogy here. The movie analogy for what Blizzard tried to do with the Overwatch League is this classic movie called Fitzcarraldo, which is like a Werner Herzog movie, where the premise of the movie, which this is why I'm giving the example, because like the premise alone is ridiculous, is this guy has like some like massive like cruise ship type thing that he's trying to move piece by piece over a mountain just to the other side, which is like, obviously everything about that's just like, why would you even bother? Like, because the idea is it's either the most genius ambition or it's the stupidest move ever. Like, and in this case, spoiler, it's a stupid move. It doesn't really make any sense. So when it comes to the community side of things and doing stuff, again, I thought initially this is going to fucking bang. Like, if all those idiots in League of Legends couldn't handle it, imagine what an FPS community is going to love with when we come in and we do a show where I literally have the main face of the game on a non-official broadcast, giving all his real thoughts on all the teams and trolling team shit and saying who he thinks is brilliant, and, you know, even speculating. He has to word it specifically, but he even speculates on the fucking league of his employer that basically has told him under some capacity, you cannot officially ever speculate about this. Like, that should be the main source. That should be the fucking, that's exactly, we've mined we've tapped into the bloody oil on that one, haven't we? And the problem is, it's not the community who likes that, unfortunately. There's a few people, there's a few sort of quiet, reasonable people who like the show, but I would agree, like, I even myself get shocked by some of the Twitter response that Monty gets, because he'll get the kind of response to a comment where I'll always just see the kerfuffle first. Like, I'll see all these threads, like Monty Crystal, all these comments, and I'll think, bloody hell, what's he going to do now? I'll click the link and I'll be like, is that it, really? Like, he's getting the kind of response I would get for a really edgy joke, which literally might even say a player is shit, human shit. But then his tweet will have been just like, I think that the team you were all saying is the 4th best, actually isn't as good as you think, and they're the 6th best. And everyone's like, kill him, get the heretic. It's like, fucking hell. So the reason it's amazing for me is like, I think the only thing that saves me in that game and doesn't push me out entirely is because I don't know enough like I do in Counter-Strike to really activate my own obnoxious opinions. I don't really get too much backlash. Like I tend to just be the host on those things. And then I try to just facilitate a good conversation, which obviously has its place. But luckily, I'm personally not getting much backlash for my own opinions. I will say this, though. The fact that the game has been out now, like including the beta period, we're probably looking at I think it's like 2.5 years now or something. The fact we're 2.5 years in, and any time you criticize something about the game or the league, the discussion is still whether or not secretly you sort of defo hate the game and always did, and you're some sort of mole sitting for 3 years desperately trying to kill a game that apparently you never cared about in the beginning, even though you've made loads of podcasts. Like the idea that's still one of the discussions does dishearten me a little bit. Like, are we not past that? Like whether or not you like the podcast, I'm clearly not trying to con everyone in Overwatch, am I? Like it's a pretty shit long con at this point in time.
Yeah, well, so it begs the question, like, I mean, you must have thought about just packing it up. I mean, you know,
Sure.
again, I can speak from my own personal experience. It was like, you know, once all the nonsense happened with League of Legends, where it was clear not only did I have this huge corporation that were going out of their way to basically, you know, deplatform me and kind of erase me from the history of their game, but then Reddit also got involved on a staff level, not just a moderator level. And the community are just a collection of morons that don't even understand the essential function of journalism. You know, they've got the front page of Reddit they always wanted, just puff, you know, powder puff interviews, layup interviews, you know, puff pieces, occasional little bit of speculation about the game. And that's all they've ever wanted. There is no problem here. Everything is fine. It's all hermetically sealed. Let's not fix anything. And let's continue that through every game we make over at Riot Games. So I just thought, fuck it, it's not really worth my effort. If it's something that has a, you know, broader goal, something that's really important, like the Rick Fox story and with the racism internally, obviously I'm gonna fucking go to the wall to try and get that out there. But generally, it's like, you know, I get stuff past my fucking desk and people email me stuff and say, have you heard about this? And this is going on. It's like, listen, fuck you, you're on your own. There's literally zero in it for me, except hate. You know, death threats and this constant back and forth with, you know, basement dwelling incels who run a subreddit. It's not worth my time. Meanwhile, I can go and publish big, meaningful stories elsewhere in other games and, you know, receive accolades for doing so. So it begs the question that in a scene where somebody like you and somebody like Monty is going to be like largely unappreciated, you put out what should be a definitive and essential podcast in that space, and people just complain about it. You get some of the best guests of any content out there. Well, I mean, but people criticize it. It just begs the question: why the fuck do you not just down tools and just, you know, pack it up and take that time and do something that you can monetize or something that's going to get a lot of attention?
Luckily, and I don't know if I've ever told you this theory, but I actually don't believe that there is such a thing as altruism, which is also, by the way, a ridiculous, almost stereotype cliche of what my opinion would be about that topic, because it sounds unnecessarily provocative and edgy, and probably has some sort of grain of truth to it. But it's like, right, let's see how he's done this then. So basically, the long and short of it is, I think even when you do something that appears to have no reason, it's because you do actually enjoy doing something like that for someone else or what it means to them. And so, in my opinion, on some level, you are still just chasing your own sort of like fulfillment of desire or a nice feeling or a thought that you are nice and contentment, you know. And so along similar lines, like I have the very easy selfish reason, which is that, I mean, Monty's a good friend of mine. Overwatch is the game he works in. If I want to do a show with him, it has to be Overwatch at the moment. So I certainly enjoy doing a show with him. He's someone I think I actually probably didn't even appreciate it until I stopped doing a show. It was actually you in CSGO and him in Overwatch. I had a brief period, it was maybe like a year before we started up. I was from the Patreon again, and where Monty and there was like more of a slow period before we started Overwatch League. We only did a few episodes of it. And I actually realized in these ones that the problem is when you get a good co-host and you have good rapport with them, it's so natural, it's easy to forget it's there. And so the problem I noticed was when I went and did other shows with other people, they might be people I really like or I personally find really interesting, but the dynamic on a show sometimes would work on a low level, sometimes It would occasionally have some fun parts, but it was way more work. And I noticed it was just way less enjoyable, actually. So I found in general, as long as you can make enough to live and all the rest of that crap, you just want to do the shows with people you think is cool or people that you enjoy talking to or someone where you yourself want to know. Like one of the things I've always found fun, we've always said this is, if you have a really interesting topic, you don't get into it privately. You just say, save it for the show. It'll be better on the show. Because the idea is you don't want to know that person's like my ridiculous take there that altruism doesn't exist or whatever. Like you want to hear that fresh. You don't want to hear that the second take of that. You want to have to deal with the ridiculous reality of that live and direct.
So overall, I mean, again, you said right at the start of the interview, you were talking about, it's an exciting time. Is it a bubble? I've seen you be very critical of some of the valuations that are floating around. I share a little bit of the skepticism. I don't think we're in a bubble, because a bubble implies that when it fucking pops, everything goes away. I think there are sort of we're in an ecosystem within which bubbles exist. And sure. I think in particular, one of those is definitely Overwatch. I think my views on it are very clear. I think you largely share a lot of them. But I wanted to just ask, I mean, given that, you've been sort of a proponent of, I guess, essentially trying to grow Overwatch since the start. I mean, after all, that's what content creators do. Are you pessimistic about the way it's heading? Because, we've got this, again, I did a report the other day where I just said factually, viewership has been in a constant decline since it started. And then somebody replied to the Reddit thread saying, but he's left out the fact that hours viewed are up. And it's like, okay, but those two aren't contradictory, are they? I mean, it's when you've got a broadcast that literally, the rerun hours count to hours viewed. And when Blizzard are putting out like broadcasts that look like they're live, so drops, for the tokens or whatever the fuck are active on reruns, you're going to be able to cream some extra hours on top. And that's exactly why they're doing it. Fact remains, I don't think this is where Blizzard wanted to be sort of heading into, the third year, the roadshow year. So, I mean, do you think this is going to be a total collapse, a total failure? Or are you a bit more optimistic than I am?
The big problem I have and always have had with the Overwatch League is I seem to be the only person who didn't follow for the first trick, because the first trick was believing there was such a thing as the Overwatch League, that it was a coherent concept, that they understood once they sold the teams where they would play from, how the league would be divided up, how the travel schedule would work, what the travel would even look like, what sorts of like domestic relationships you'd have to have with sponsors to be able to fund a team just staying in one place, the costs of a stadium and how many people would need to watch and come out live. I think every logistical aspect, I think, wasn't mapped out. And this feels to me, the entire project, like something that it almost feels like whoever came up with the project was like, right, well, there's my basic idea, but I've got to run actually. I've got a different project I'm going to do. So can you take over from here? And then whoever took over was like, okay, let's have a look at this. All sounds like they planned it all out. And then when they opened up, they were like, there's only step one, start the Overwatch League. Like, where's step? And the idea is, I asked this of all the people I knew in Overwatch at the very beginning. No, stop telling me what the press release says, mate. Just tell me, when will the teams be in their own regions, right? Okay, it's going to be in a year. Right, well, in a year from now, when they're in their own region, do they have to have a stadium? I guess they would. Well, if they have to have a stadium, mate, then how much would one of those cost? Like, well, I don't know how much a stadium. Well, if they had to have the stadium, then you'd have to factor that in. And to ever make money back on the stadium, you need a certain amount of people going. You'd imagine, like, these are people who should be nailing these questions privately, right? They were failing. Like, they almost looked at me as if, like, get my secretary in here. What's he talking about stadium? It's like, that sort of a level. So I have to say, I never believed they had it from the beginning, mate. I was just willing to give it the room that it had a chance to succeed because I saw some of the names they were bringing in. And if you look at some of those names, you think, listen, mate, even though this looks like a bubble, if you really do get half a dozen NFL owners, a bunch of massive like media companies on board, I mean, those guys pretty much do manipulate perception. Like they could maybe trick people into believing this is big enough that it could sort of, I don't know, it could bootstrap itself up to some extra level. The problem is it hasn't done any of that. And it hasn't at any point in time. And as you just alluded to there, the last 2 years have just been a bunch of people within Activision Blizzard playing cat and mouse with stats and just showing you one stat one day. It's like a 3-card Monty or something. One day we show you a stat that's hours viewed. Next time, it's number of total average minutes. But it's like, what is this shit? At least keep it consistent in your own metrics. Like, I've always thought this, Richard, the ultimate trick that people who aren't from our era won't know about esports is people in esports can't shut the fuck up about their success. Like the joke I would have had back in the day would be like, do you know how you know someone's a vegetarian or had 1 million viewers for their event? Oh, don't worry, they'll tell you. It's like that. That's the level we were at. Like these guys couldn't shut the fuck up going on about the stats. I'll notice in the Viewbot era, Rich, they were a lot quicker to tell you the stats for their event. All of a sudden, they instantly had their and you know what? I've broken the record as well. I know the last guy broke the record. Next guy will probably I broke the record. Well, that's the problem. Is how conspicuous is the lack of those stats in an era where people have literally bought into leagues for tens of millions, and we're all supposed to be welcoming in the next group of people for 3x the original buy-ins. So the idea we have the least stats of all stinks to high heaven. That is ridiculous. It's like my joke I always say. I notice they don't appreciate it, Rich, the tournament organizers. Every time a tournament organizer gets cocky, great example would be the Overwatch League with the Dallas homestand. All I say is the same question, and I'll be saying it till the end of time. Can I please see the gate? All I want to know is how much money you made on the gate to this event in dollars, US dollars, like every motherfucking sporting event on this planet Earth, because that is one of the primary metrics to know if you actually have a business model or not. If you don't, and you won't tell me it, then based on what I've just said, and people just have to believe me if they haven't been in the industry long enough, it means it is almost certainly not a good number, whatever it is. And that's why they're not telling you it. Because the problem is, if you hear that they sold out an 8,000 person place, that's going to sound pretty shit if you find out they made 30 grand off it or something, you know, because that should be like, I'd guess like $1 million or something if it was a big sporting event.
And it gets crazier because, you know, next year, everyone's meant to have their own home stadiums. I'm being told internally, you know, that they're the schedule is going to be, they're going to try and split it into like coastal and then international, and they're going to have people, you know, these 14 games, but all stadiums have to be like broadcast ready, because like the show's going to be done there, and like all this crazy stuff, and people are hemorrhaging money while they're waiting, like, because they've got to meet all these requirements. And it just sounds like this is just way too ambitious a project. Like, not even CGS in the past went this far, where it was like the Birmingham Salvo had to play a home game in Birmingham, and the London Mint had to play, a home game in London, and, you know, Berlin Alliance, everyone had to fly out to Berlin to do their shit. I mean, that's just like, it just feels that's almost like a 5-year plan at best. You should be doing that year 5, year 10. You shouldn't be doing that what is essentially year 3. And just hugely expensive just to do logistically. And the drain it's going to put on the players and the staff. It just seems like an absolute nightmare. It feels like even if they can get through this season and they decide to go ahead and actually do it next year, I think it's going to be an unprecedented disaster. I think, you know, we'll see record retirements from players and staff. I think people are just going to
Here's something that might blow your mind. I actually think, and I was shocked by this, even as I'm about to say this, one of the people who seemed to have one of the most down-to-earth, poignant takes on franchising was Banks of FaZe Clan. Now, everyone's going to be like, but isn't he just an idiot who just gives his opinions? No, in the process of doing that, he pulled like a bloody Kanye where they just make some actually like amazing insight that you're like, shit, where's that coming? And then it's in the middle of all the rest of the, you know, hey, man, you know what I mean? Like, it's in the middle of all that they'll say. So what Banks said was that the reason it didn't make sense to franchise is because, like, what are you franchising in? Well, you're not franchising in esports. Yeah, if Lurpus and BDS and all the bloody lawyers whose entire job is resting on esports being a big thing, and all the team owners who have the teams, if all these people really did believe there was such a thing as esports that we're franchising in, as they always try to do the sleight of hand, they'll tell you they're bullish on esports. So they mean any video game that's multiplayer one day being played in the future is a massive sport, right? What the fuck does that have to do with me buying into the Overwatch League in 2019 for $30 million now? The fact that you're telling, that would be like saying, should I buy this football team, Rich, in Turkey? And you going, well, I can guarantee you there'll be sport in Turkey in 3030. It's like, yeah, but what about my sport that I'm buying in now? Well, I have no idea whatsoever on that one. Maybe not. Well, that would be what I'd want to hear, isn't it? So in this scenario, the real question, which I think no one's answered, is this, right? Bearing in mind, we've already had, like, we're almost at the end of the second year of the Overwatch League. Like, you know, we're solidly through it. We're not that far from there. The playoffs come along. After 2 whole years, does what they accomplished in 2 years suggests they could even be profitable in, say, 5 years. Right now, you'd say no. Well, the problem is this. Whoever said Overwatch was going to last 30 years? How was that ever even going to happen? I don't even know that Counter-Strike, quite a popular game in context, is going to last 5 more years. You know the way the games are. When they wind down, they go, it's like stopping being the top team. You don't just go to number 2 gracefully. You get your bloody head knocked off the top and you go straight down to God knows where, sometimes nowhere. Sometimes you're like Virtus Pro now, and you rank who knows what. I mean, I guess like 80th or something crazy. So I feel as though that one of the big problems and the unaddressed question in the franchising issue is, how does it make sense to buy in for tens of millions to a game that in theory could be dead in 10 years? I mean, even a 10-year plan doesn't work in that sense.
They're already talking about a sequel or some sort of kind of fix to it, right? So, what does that mean? Is Overwatch 2 going to be PvE focused like they've alluded to in reporting by Jason Schreier, or is it going to be a sequel that everyone's going to have to port across, and it might have slightly different dynamics and different characters? There's just so much uncertainty. I understand buying a football team. I understand buying a baseball team. I understand buying an NBA team. I don't think that investment potentially dies in 2 years, 3 years. Overwatch, any esport franchise, the implication is the game's going to last a long enough time for you to get a return on it.
Oh, by the way,
create revenue streams.
You know, when all of us in esports, I do it myself as well, mate, because I mainly do it to media figures who are talking shit on us hit pieces. You know, when you say that angle to them, when you go, you in the dying media, you're desperate for outget, right? Difference is we can do that, Rich, because you and me make a lot of money, considerable money compared to our investment off our part of the journalism. What I don't understand is this. How do esports orgs say, of course, all these teams are going to be coming to us because their sport's dying. Homie, your sport hasn't been alive yet. You haven't made any money yet. You just took the investment. Like, they're in a dying sport. It's slowly dying, though. It isn't dead tomorrow, and you can still make billions now. Like, I'd wait till you get close to that level before talking shit. Like, I agree. It's a nice pivot into esports. But the difference is, you could probably still do really solid work for the next 20 years in the NBA. As I'm saying here, who the fuck knows what esports is in your specific franchised game league in 10 years from now? At the moment, we have no proof it would even exist. So everything is possible, but also nothing is possible. It could be absolutely nothing.
So, I mean, overall, there's a lot of theory crafting about, well, what happens if the Overwatch League fails? And a lot of people think it is going to be this, seismic, event. I used to feel that way when it was first announced, but I kind of feel now all the investors in esports have got a little bit more savvy. You've got, for example, huge investors over at Team Liquid. Team Liquid deliberately opted out of the Overwatch League.
Yes.
So that suggests to me that their investors are sort of savvy enough to realize that you can have a good thing with esports investment without having to commit to these big American wet dreams of, franchise leagues and, unfettered profit from sponsors and everything and revenue streams and gate receipts and everything else that just clearly isn't going to happen yet. So, do you feel that if the Overwatch League were to collapse, let's say we get to the end of the 3rd year and it's a disaster, do you think that's going to have this really negative, profoundly so impact on esports, or do you think actually it'll just be business as usual?
One of the things I would say, this is just my own speculation, but it's going off experience in the industry, is the key difference for me between now, when it has a similar bubble feel, and when it did blow up as a bubble in the CGS era and the .com bubble bursting, etc., is the key distinction for what's different now is, like you're saying, it's the quality of person who is investing and who is interested and aware of esports. In my opinion, even if it was a similar company, like say Intel sponsored something back then and then pulled out when the global recession hit, or say, at the time, obviously, you had television companies who were getting involved. In my opinion, those were low-level operators within the company who were themselves gambling, essentially their own jobs, but on the idea that, if I'm the guy who wrangles this, really far ahead of the curve thing, esports, and it becomes massive, I've made my whole career. You know, I'm the golden boy at that point in time. But I'll bet some of these people got fired, were demoted. I remember famously the CGS one was kind of like the brainchild of a guy who was like an Emmy award-winning NFL guy. And then I believe it was something like, you know, I think it was like his nephew or his grandson was into games or whatever. And the story on that one, if anyone doesn't know, is basically he just moved on to a different project within the company, and whoever took over was like, what the fuck's this thing on the book? CGS, get rid of that. Like, and that really is how it was. So you can see either it was a pet project of a high up person who can just leave it at any moment, or it's a low level person gambling that it works big and it didn't. I think now, like you're saying, there's respectable businessmen involved now. There's people who know what they're doing. Like, it's a spoiler for everyone out there. It's going to ruin, sadly, a lot of the great, like, sort of crazy clickbait headlines you see. But anytime you see square brackets, your favorite celebrity has invested into square brackets esports team, I'll give you the bad news. They haven't. What's happened is they have some very intelligent people who manage their money, and they basically tell that person the level of risk they want to invest that money with. And then that person goes and he picks something. And so if you're saying I want like a high amount of risk but a higher potential reward, he's probably picking esports, and he's saying, right, this is what I'm recommending to people. Here's 2 or 3 options. You know, you can invest in this team or this league or maybe something at broadcaster. And that's what's happened. They don't really know anything about that. But that's a good sign, because what that means is right now, people who are managing very rich and otherwise talented people's money are saying at the moment, actually, esports can be worth it. So I'm kind of with you on that one. I think some people will be burned, but actually, I think a lot of the people, their mentality, the key thing for me is the paradigm shift isn't that they think they're going to get rich off esports now, that they think that one day rich esports will make people rich. So in my opinion, most people who to you or me have done a big investment with 20 million, to them, that isn't much. And so what they're going to say instead is, right, what didn't work about Overwatch League? So for example, the game didn't have enough viewers. You know, it had aspects maybe politically that weren't great. I don't know what you'd pick as the reasons why. And then, or maybe they actually decide it was the regionalization model. Maybe that was part of the problem. Whatever you do, you just say, right, is there another option on the table, another league I can invest in? Like, you know, in fact, if anything, I know the way it works now. I buy the team for this much. I know what it's like to hire people to run the team. I even know you have to invest money in scouting, whatever it would be. I think if anything, a lot of them they'll have maintained enthusiasm for esports, and they'll just pivot to another game, another league. And that's why, I mean, you were one of the first people I saw mention this. But if indeed behind the scenes, Activision Blizzard's whole plan was basically CWL, the Call of Duty World League, is going to be sort of a rope ladder drop down to the investors that want to get out of the fucking bane pit of the Overwatch League and hop over to something that looks very similar but has a bloody living game behind it. Yeah, that seems like actually quite a shrewd move of whoever did it from Blizzard. That's not a bad move if you're already painted into the corner, that is.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, all I know is that the way that they've structured, the way that both of the leagues work is that it's quick cash injections for them, for the company, for Activision Blizzard. And it honestly feels like the only thing they're risking is ridicule. Actually, it's the investors that are risking things. Activision Blizzard, this is not going to harm them if, for example, Overwatch League collapses next year. It's not going to harm them. This is just their attempt to make a lot of money off esports as quickly as possible. I think that's why there's this weird urgency to try and get to the stage where, they feel it should be at. I always think they've been a bit regretful about how, we're Activision Blizzard, we created esports, with the success of StarCraft, and we totally didn't get ours. And, the Twitch buyout by Amazon, where they were like, listen, we should get some of that money because our games help build up Twitch. And Twitch are like, no, that's not how any of this works, because it's effectively an advertising platform. I think they've been trying to make up for that mistake ever since for the sheer volume of years they rejected esports. And this quick cash injection where you're literally paying, this is like a high stakes gambling table where you pay 20 to 30 million just to get in the fucking room, and that's to sit at the table. And then you have to put additional money on that table. It's crazy. So I think Activision Blizzard will be okay. I think a lot of the people that lose out big on this, especially the second wave of investors that have paid allegedly more than the original ones, I think those guys stay out of esports for a while for sure. But fortunately, as you said, I think there's just so many more people queuing up to have a go and play the table, play the odds. So look, you also talked about opportunities, and how it's a good time for somebody like yourself because there's a lot of opportunities out there. It seems to me that with that, there are a lot of people trying to take away those opportunities because of the nature of your personality and, you know, things you've said in the past. And because we've kind of cozied up to the mainstream media in a lot of ways, in the mainstream games press, because it gives us extra eyeballs and it opens us up to a new audience, we're sort of having those people basically try and push people, even though they're late to the party, push people they don't want in the industry out so they can sort of replace them or just create an environment that's sort of more conducive to their internalized values. So let's just start with that. I mean, I've seen a lot of people like go after you very viciously and try and take away pretty much your employability. You know, you know the network you've built for yourself. You know, potentially like lose your Twitter, lose your YouTube channels, lose things like this, based on things that, you know, I don't necessarily agree with, but I recognize you've already atoned for. So it feels like it's a tough time to be anybody with an opinion right now in esports with this new wave of people coming in. So I just wanted to get some thoughts about that.
Yeah, I would agree, especially because like part of the problem we have at the moment is like the good news for people who see this sort of crap and now it's all in esports. Like, for example, character X in Overwatch is problematic because it doesn't have this aspect I want a fictional character to have. Or, you know, I mean, some of the most ridiculous examples in general gaming were things like this fictional game that takes place in 13th century Poland doesn't have characters of a certain ethnicity. And it's like, is this even a bloody art? What is this? Well, the point is, when you're in other games and you see that, that means that that's all that gaming press has to write about. Like, they have to churn out a story that day, and they didn't have one. They didn't have a great story about whatever that 13th century Polish game was. So the only angle they could take on it is like, this is a bit of a reach, but see if it gets some outrage, see if it gets some clicks. Well, the good news is the fact that that comes to esports now means we're relevant. The bad news is those people are almost exclusively bottom feeders and scavengers, and they don't actually bring anything of value to the scene, unfortunately. They just come, and as you say, hilariously, they come late. Like, they're basically the equivalent of, this is like if we were having a house party after a big event in esports, and, you know, you invite around all the people in the scene, and then a few people bring a few people extra, and a few people bring a few people extra, and eventually, you know, there's people you don't know there, and it's your own house, and someone stands up and goes, "Thief!" and points at you in your own house. You'd be like, who even is this clown? Like, that's the equivalent of what's happening. But sadly, and this has been the problem with people who have been journalists turn activists the whole time, is nobody can, because it takes too much digging and actual journalism of your own to fully know that these people are grifters and that they're not genuine in their own opinions. And when you know that, they don't bother you. You, in fact, say to people, I ignore that. That guy doesn't even know what you're talking about. In fact, he doesn't even know my game. Someone else has put him up to it. You know this. Every hit piece that's ever been written, I can find out just through Twitter associations who's replied to who. Like, about 3 people in esports, they almost certainly were put up to writing the article from and were fed all the information from, including stories that, you know, you wouldn't even find from a Google search with like 20 pages in, but magically they have, yet don't seem to be aware what the game Counter-Strike is. So, you know, you see all these stories. Like I say, on the one hand, it's a good thing. It means that actually our scene's getting big enough that even mainstream media has some impact on it. The bad part is it's basically a tired game, which for people like you and me, we can see the way it works and we can see who's going to get upset by it. But unfortunately, a lot of the people who are getting manipulated, it's always their first rodeo, it seems. So they never seem to understand that this person's a liar or this person making a claim has no basis to make the claim. They're not qualified. So, and my big problem is, as far as I can tell, they all operate on that principle of like no smoke without fire, which if anyone knows anything about media knows is definitely not a principle that applies. And so unfortunately, normal people will hear that and they will just assume before they look into it, because they don't have time to, you know, run everything down. They assume the journalist did that for them. They're going to assume there must be some truth to this, you know, even if he skewed it, the initial facts must be correct. And so I think part of the problem is it's not just ignorance, because I always hated the way people just like gave a pass to these shitty journalists, like, oh, they just don't know about esports. Like, they do. They know enough to know that they're lying, put it that way. The big problem is all the rest of us don't just go, ignore this guy. We all do, or to some level react. Like, if someone wrote an article about someone who's a friend of mine in esports, I'd be tempted before I made myself not press the button to be like, what is this shit? And accidentally link it to all my followers as well. You know, it's just human nature, unfortunately, I feel like they play on.
So, I mean, it's also important to acknowledge. I mean, and I know you have, right? So this isn't a surprise, but just within the context of the conversation, I mean, you acknowledge that you fucked up, and given these people ammunition, and not just that's not just why you fucked up, I mean, the famous example obviously always comes back to the Luminosity thing, which you've apologized for time and time again. There's also some bizarre things like
in a weird way though, like the Luminosity one, the best part about that is, unlike some of my other fuck-ups, some of them I might never have apologized for publicly, sometimes I've done it privately, sometimes it's just been ones where at the time I didn't think there's anything wrong with it, but later I was like, yeah, probably was, like you over-egged the pudding on that one. The difference is the Luminosity one, in a weird way, is what I'm glad exists, because it has helped me smoke out the people who aren't legitimate, who are talking about that topic. Because if someone comes and they say, you made this tweet that offended me, etc., and I can just say to them, well, I actually on the same day had a tweet where I apologized for that, even in the native language of the people I insulted, right? If they instead go, no, you didn't, or they just never bother to present that fact along with the first piece of information, I kind of know that they're biased, in a weird way, where some of the other ones, it could be a debate, couldn't it?
Do you think there are some things you can't apologize for? Because that seems to be the argument that's presented.
Yeah, that is always
some things are completely unforgivable.
Well, I would say it's like this. I've noticed that no one seems to really hold that position, because they always let people on their side do way more heinous things. So as far as I can tell, it's like this. It's that since the person who's speaking has an actual bias against you as a person, or what they perceive as your personality or your politics or whatever identifying metrics they value most highly, because they think that they know who you are, it's more that it doesn't matter what your crime is. They'll just never believe or give you the chance to have changed, or to have changed your mind on that, or to even have apologized. Like, for example, if they assume you're a scumbag and just a liar, well, then any apology they make it even worse. Now you're calculated. You did it just to play on the person's sympathies. You clearly were insincere. It's easy to read bad intentions into everything someone does. So in that kind of a scenario, I think that sort of person just is never going to forgive you anyway. And quite frankly, one of the problems I have, and this will always be my issue, is even though it would sometimes be easy to just say, what I did was fucked up, so I apologize to everyone. Like, I'll never do that, because why would I apologize to someone I didn't do anything to? I'll apologize to the person I'd said something to, or if I've had some inappropriate comment. But like the idea, any person, like, it's like that old joke where it's supposedly like an Irish comment that someone will say, is this a private fight or can anyone get involved? It's like, people think that's what Twitter is now. Like, you made this tweet and I'm outraged. Who are you? Like, I saw this tweet on someone else's timeline. I said, why would I give you an apology? What, because you saw a tweet? Is it my fault that Twitter mechanism works that way? No. If you apologize to someone, it's either the people you addressed or someone you were commenting about in some way that presumably you consider inappropriate. So I will say, unfortunately, I don't blame everyone for this, but the fact that everyone else's default approach is like, just send out a mass apology to everyone in the world for what I've done and acknowledge it's entirely wrong. That does make life harder for the rest of us that just want to be reasonable and say, I'll apologize for what I've done, but I'm not going to apologize to random people. Or 10 years later, have to be grilled on it like it's, like fucking Cold Case episode where someone's hunting me down.
The other one that blew up recently, and I kind of felt this started another new wave of people trying to have you deplatformed or mischaracterize your beliefs, was when you tweeted about Alex Jones being a G, and you said Alex Jones is a G, and that's the quote. That's as far as it went. And you added context within that tweet by saying, he's a self-made guy who's operated outside of the machinery of the system and has created a living for himself. I didn't see anything in there that talked about his politics.
I also even said within the same tweet, basically, like, don't be a pleb who lets other people make your mind up for you. Like, look into shit yourself.
I mean, look, yeah, the thing that I'll say about that was, again, I mean, like the timing was, it was when we had all the Sandy Hook court case was going on, so the timing was sort of terrible to maybe make that point. And I've said things which I guess people could uncharitably take out of context. I've said I don't necessarily want Alex Jones completely mass deplatformed from the internet. I've said, I find him a comedic figure, and very rare, on occasion that comedy just, spill over into malevolence, because he poses as a news organization, he poses as a journalist, but what he does has nothing in common with news and journalism, or what news and journalism should be, and that's incredibly dangerous. That can convince people who are mentally unhinged to go and do things, to, I guess, you know, the buzzword is radicalize them. And we saw that with the Pizzagate instance, where a guy, literally an InfoWars viewer, you know, went and took a gun down to Comet, you know, Pizza, and you know, this is what, and all the people who harassed the Sandy Hook family, you know, Alex Jones has to bear some responsibility for that. So, you know, is that something that in retrospect, you know, you regret a little bit? Or, I mean, do you think that you should be able to speak about principles without it necessarily being an endorsement of everything that individual has said, has done, you know, and all of their flaws and foibles?
Well, this is where, unfortunately, that nonsense concept of the dog whistle, which is invoked again by anyone who wants to ungenerously read into anything you've ever said, becomes the limiting factor to whether you can even have a discussion about what you've said. Because in this scenario, like, I'm not going to defend things I never said, but they can just claim that I meant those things. So, for example, by their logic, saying Alex Jones is a G somehow then means everything he's ever said or done, I not only agree with, but I am somehow myself culpable for those things happening or existing. Or because you remember, that's the other classic one they used to do. Yeah, but your opinion normalizes opinions like that. Yeah, right. Brilliant angle again, because by that logic, you can never have any reasonable opinion that's anywhere in the vicinity of a really unreasonable opinion, which we all know doesn't allow a spectrum. It means you have to have extreme sides, which is obviously not what anyone who wants open and honest discussion would promote. So I would say on that one, I'd agree. Probably not first of all, I'm not someone who actually follows a lot of world politics. I have no idea of some of the external things that might be going on contextually. So it's very easy to sort of fail to read the room on that one, as it were. I think that can easily happen to anyone. Secondly, there's the whole angle that, again, it was very rarely people who were my followers who were upset with this tweet. Like 99% of people who seem to reply don't even follow me on Twitter. So that was also one of the moments when I learned that in the modern day, it's now about like everyone on the internet, like looking for the shit they don't want, like sharing with, oh, look at this, let's all get this person. Like that's like a new sort of mob sport on the internet. It's like just looking around, like, as opposed to what Twitter was made for, which is you follow the people you are interested in. This is the opposite. It's like, let's find the person I dislike the most, who has the worst take on this matter, and tell them to kill themselves. It's basically the approach I can in not even more dressed up language than that sometimes, believe it or not. Like the person who thinks you've said the outrageous thing. I've always said this. Part of what I think allows human nature to work this way is it's a loophole to allow you to do anything horrible you want, because you actually ironically have dehumanized the other person by saying they're a bigot or something, and then you get to attack them for whatever perceived crimes they either have done or share some culpability in, as we alluded to before. So I would say that's an example of one where I think that's another one, quite frankly, where I don't feel as though the actual statement itself is particularly that outrageous even. Because again, like, where did I mention Sandy Hook? Where have I mentioned anything about the idea as well? You, I'm sure you can appreciate this. The idea that I have to mention that to mention something else about a person's personality or something they've done. The idea that to say something like, this person over here did something good on Project A. Yeah, but what about Project Z? Well, I'm not talking about that right now. No, but you have to mention Project Z because Project Z was very bad and condemn them for Project Z. Like, that, to me, that will be nonsense behavior forever. I'll never accept that as a reasonable premise. I don't think it's any way to treat people either. And I'll even add as a final detail, wasn't as relevant on the Alex Jones one, but on some of these that are involved with like political or criminal cases, I also think as a journalist, unless you are very, very careful, you should not actually go out of your way to make any kind of too hot a take on someone, for example, being a criminal. Like you should, so this person should be going to jail for 100 years for that. If that case hasn't even finished, you might be talking about an innocent person there. So I also personally don't buy into that whole thing of like you'll never see me condemn people for that way. I might say I like somebody's controversial, but I won't condemn them because I don't think you should have to.
So the Alex Jones comment led to one journalist in particular sort of, doing, I guess, what is they call hit pieces now. Monstering, it used to be called in the glory days. In Patrick Klepek basically, wrote an article that in no uncertain terms, when he put it out publicly, he called you a racist. And in that article, it contained unbelievable lies. I think he said you'd retweeted the Daily Stormer, which was an absolute fabrication.
Stormfront, I think it was.
Stormfront.
One of the two. Yeah.
Yeah, Stormfront, I think you're right.
Which, as you pointed out, factually was not even accurate. Like he actually had
well, it's a complete lie, but
it's also,
it's a disgusting lie, and
that's also one of the ones that like I get very suspicious when people make accidents that help their cause.
Oh, sure, yeah. So look, it's a dumb question, right? But I guess we have to get into it. I mean, I know you're not a racist. But there comes a point where I think there's a discussion about, edgy jokes, edgy humor. Have we entered a period where that sort of thing, for people with platforms is like, it's like a childish thing you have to put away now because you have to be like more responsible or whatever. In the past, I think, because we're from that old school fucking internet era of just saying whatever the fuck you want on forums. Sure. I think, adapting to this idea of being responsible figureheads is probably, there's an adjustment period there. But I mean, look, I think I'll ask the question. When the Poland thing blew up, a lot of people were saying, "Oh, this is proof that Duncan's xenophobic or whatever." Within that, you actually criticised Poland for having a racism problem in football games, right? So you said one of the reasons that I'm not mad keen on Poland is they have a lot of racist people there, and black footballers get booed during the game. So that doesn't sound like something a racist would say. Yet you're very often characterized, I see it all the time, white supremacist, racist, misogynist. Why do you think people say that about you?
Yeah, well, what would their perception be, I guess? I think, first of all, I'm someone where, and this is something actually the Poland thing in esports taught me about a lot, is anytime you're making any kind of a joke, people have to know something about your character before they can take the joke in the way you intended it. Because, for example, it's actually one of the reasons personally as to why I am always torn over the angle of like young people, especially young teenage boys, using slurs in video games. Because while I certainly would agree, in a context where now that game you're playing in is no longer just some private imaginary space called the internet that no one's policing, it is now a place where things are being documented, things will be held in, for future posterity, things will be shown to employers. In that sort of a world, I would obviously tell those people, listen, regardless of what you think of this word, don't use it. Like, it's going to be bad for your career, and people are literally going to take it and assume the worst. They're going to assume you're a really bad racist, mate, if you say that. But the problem is, in that scenario, one of the things, if you've ever been a gamer, is that most of those people, if you ever talk to them, they're against racism themselves. Like half of what they're doing, the mechanism of that joke is their logic is, because me and you are friends and we're playing a game and I'm not racist, that's why when I say this silly, edgy joke, it's an edgy joke, because we both acknowledge the initial condition, which is that if this was real, if I really meant this, I'd be a terrible person, and you'd be a terrible person for thinking it was funny, and actually it wouldn't even be a joke, would it? It'd just be an overtly horrible thing to say. So my point there is, you don't want to treat that 12-year-old kid as though he was the worst racist in the world when you don't know. But he's not doing himself any favors, is he, by doing that, just putting it out in the world and then expecting that anyone who comes across that is just supposed to know what he thinks. So I'll agree. I think it's a very, very tricky area. I think you're actually going to find, interestingly enough, because it's kind of similar to when you put work out there in the world as a journalist. Sometimes the piece you're so sure is going to kill it, you just know this piece is amazing. That's like a good response, but it's a bit muted. And, that was good. Yeah, I liked it. And you're like, what? Did no one see what I was doing there or what I was trying to point? Like, why didn't it land? Meanwhile, you sometimes have the opposite. I've had the ones where I've been a bit rushed on a piece and I can't quite think of how this should end, but whatever, I'll end it here this way. You put it out and everyone tells you this is the best thing you've ever written. Oh, this is great. Like, you've tapped into all this. You've even done all this shit you didn't even intend to do. You're like, well, I didn't even mean to put that out, but I guess that does make sense. I think it's like that with making any sort of statement online. You never fully know how it's going to be perceived. And I will even say, I'm someone who I would say, if I had to list natural strengths, knowing how other people perceived me, especially early in my career, I'd have that very, very low. I think that's something over time I've built up. And I think part of it has even been, one of my problems is, if you look at my content, I don't pander my content to be what people want it to be, but I try to know what they think of the same topics I'm talking about so I can frame it a certain way. The problem is that's almost impossible to do with jokes, as far as I can tell, because you don't know who the audience is. So that's the big problem I have.
Can you empathize? Well, I mean, this is twofold, I guess. I mean, first of all, the idea that if you make edgy jokes, and listen, I think you can count the amount of times you've made an edgy joke with even a racial component to it, like on one hand, easily. I mean, it's not exactly a go-to for you. And I think that, like I said, to use the Luminosity example, I think after that happened, I think there was a lot of soul searching on your part, and you know, because you realized it had actually upset people. But can you empathize with, you know, for example, we're talking about, look, it's just games, you know, it's just words, you know, these are kind of like the throwaway defenses you'll often hear in gamer circles. But can you empathize, for example, with, let's say, a black player, you know, comes into a space where he's immediately in a minority because of, you know, various socioeconomic barriers to entry, and then he just sees everybody who he would want to assume would be a peer and an equal, and they're just throwing N-words around and making racist jokes, and maybe he says, "Hey guys, I'm black," and that doesn't fix the problem actually, because, you know, they're like, "Oh, you're trying to fucking police us?" Like, I don't give a fuck. I mean, you know, I saw some clips of, like, you know, black Overwatch players, you know, saying like, "Look, I told people I was black in a game, and just listen to this," and it's just like a 4-minute diatribe of just racial abuse, and you're like, I can't believe anyone would do that. So can you empathize a little bit with, you know, what point do we need to sort of, to a certain degree, police the space so people like that can feel welcome?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because I will say, like, I do, from my own experience in Counter-Strike, I know it is a phenomenon where, like, I'll just give people a quick aside story here, because it's from so old, like, none of the people involved, I don't even need to name check them, like, there's no one anyone would know. But when I first came into the Counter-Strike scene, that was one of the first times I heavily started to get involved with American esports, because I would still play it, like 2 a.m. I would talk to people over IRC, I would watch their matches, and I would follow the European and the American scenes. And when I first came into the American scene, and I was, you know, playing pickup games with pro players, and I was talking to pro players, I was shocked by how many slurs were thrown around, especially because they were all on an incredibly lighthearted level, and they were from people even if you said something like, "Dude, you know, in my country, if you said that, that'd be considered really crazy." He was like, "Oh, I mean, it is, you know, like, you know, I'd never say that in real life, but, you know, it's just, I'm saying it in the video game, you know, whatever, who gives a fuck, you know." And the problem basically was, because it was treated as so not big a deal then, when you did have the first people in the American scene who were black, who were pro players in Quake or Counter-Strike, I can remember talking to one of them and saying to them privately, like, doesn't it bother you a bit when people just drop, like, in the middle of at the time it'd be like a ventrilo chat or something, you know, whatever it was called back then. I said, doesn't it bother when someone just says that on the stream? And I said, I mean, you know, when they say it, like, someone in the game, someone just killed them in a certain way, and they say N-word or gay if the person's gay or whatever. I said, doesn't it get to you? And he goes like, well, here's the thing. I do know that they're not saying about me. And I know that from knowing these people, they themselves don't seem racist, you know, and it's just a thing they do. Like, for some reason, it's their expletive, you know, it's just the most harsh thing they can say. And they say it when they're in the most annoyed mood. He said, but it does get to you a little bit. Like, there's some level at which you sometimes think to yourself, like, come on, man, that's grating a little bit now. Like, it's getting said all the time. So I do appreciate that. That's obviously a really tough scenario to be in. If you're the out group in any scenario coming in, it's going to be a tough time, not least because, like you alluded to there, one of the problems I think a guy like that has is if you immediately address it, now they think that you're the person who's come into a group and you haven't paid your dues in the group socially, and you're trying to set all the rules, like you say, and you're trying to be like, no, you guys stop this, stop. And so unfortunately, the people in the group are going to think, oh, he's just ruining our fun. Why is this guy coming? Whereas what the guy hopefully is trying to do is be like, I want to actually be part of this group. But if people keep doing this, it's gonna fuck me up, mate. I can't do it. So the problem I have on that one is I don't really know how you get to a better place on that one. I don't think, though, personally, to tie it in before, telling people that everyone who says any kind of an edgy joke or is an extreme racist and should be isolated from the group and kicked out of society, I don't feel as though that's the solution either. I feel like that's going completely the other way, to the other max degree. So you don't want nothing done. You don't want people just banished and themselves essentially, like I said, with a loophole, bullied online because they said something people don't like. But it's tough to know where the middle ground is on that one, certainly. Well, that's why I'd actually rather have open discussions like this about it.
Yeah, well, it sounds like what you suggest in there is, I mean, again, you know, I think again, we're talking about young people that don't have a lot of life experience.
Oh, of course.
You know, their lives are purely in the online world. They'd find out very quickly if they went to a bar and spoke like that, someone would put a fist in their face. But it sounds to me like, well, you know, again, it's awareness. I think a lot of people who throw the M word around don't understand why it hurts black people. I don't think they understand.
No, and
because they've never had a conversation with a black person about it.
That's also the sad thing as well. And this will sound like a crazy comment, but I believe it is. It's actually because outside of some biased news stories, as far as I can tell, we live in one of the least racist times relative to the rest of human history and even recent human history. So the fact that there isn't as much really terrible, like obviously institutionalized racism, or you don't see as many, like in my life, I don't see overt acts of racism on the street every day, has made too many young people think it's like a relic of an age gone past. They don't realize like it is, but that relic to some people isn't that old an age. Like some people, maybe it's only a couple of generations, or maybe it's inherently tied into their literal family history in a way that they can't forget because of where they are. They're from somewhere different originally. Like there's a lot of reasons that if you are just an 18-year-old kid who's a little bit too smart for his own good, you're going to think, well, why shouldn't I be allowed to say whatever words? It should all be equal. It's like, yeah, we get your point, mate. Like if we were all having a philosophical discussion, we'd on some level agree with you that it'd be an ideal world if everyone could use every word or everyone was banned from every word. Like, yeah, that would be the abstract of it. The problem is basically, how are you going to deal on a functional level? How are you going to actually be with people now in a conversation? And you're not going to be able to, no matter what you think, convince a brand new group of 8 people that you meet every day that you never met before that what you're saying now is within the context of a humorical, like a humorous conceit, or you're referencing something edgy, but you're not yourself being like that. You're walking a mad tightrope there. And so I do agree. I think it comes from being young, from being inexperienced. In that scenario, like you're saying there, half the time it's someone who, part of why they don't know it would be received badly is because they really do live in their own bubble where there are no, in this case, black people, gay people, whatever it might be. And so to them, they think that they can't see anyone getting harmed. You know, they can't see any kind of offense. In fact, they probably think naively that it's like I said with the Twitter example. It's like, oh, someone who wasn't even in my game is going out of his way to find out. It's like, no, mate, there might have been someone in the game. That's our point, you know.
So to sort of bring it over to you, I mean, you know, you're not somebody like that, right? I mean, you're a pretty worldly guy, you know, pretty well traveled. I honestly don't see a lot of problems with the things you tweet right now. I mean, I just don't. I mean, maybe that's me, right? But, you know, do you have an awareness that sort of, you know, making, again, not saying you've made any, you know, racially charged jokes or jokes along those lines, but just any joke that could kind of be perceived to be poking fun at a, you know, minority group or a disenfranchised group. I mean, you know, do you understand or do you accept the premise that because of where you're positioned that actually there is an additional negative element that comes if you were to do that?
I think there is. Like, one of the problems I think I have is that, like, one of the things I always really admired about Christopher Hitchens was that he had that position, which was, even if someone's dead, doesn't mean that if they were a piece of shit as a person, you just say, no, they were brilliant. That's why actually I was kind of torn on that whole Total Biscuit, like people writing horrible obituaries that were basically like lies stuff. Because my real problem with that one is if they'd have phrased that in a reasonable manner and they'd have just tried to criticize things they didn't agree with them on politically or maybe in terms of social media or something, I would have actually defended the premise, which is that if you disagreed with someone, just because they died doesn't mean you have to now pretend you love them or not give your criticisms anymore or not make a valid point that could be a meaningful contribution to our community. The problem in that case was those were people who, again, were either cynical grifters just trying to profit off outrage, people who had their own biased axe to grind where they weren't really making it just about points. They were like attacking the person when they couldn't respond back. So I guess part of my problem on that whole angle is like, I do think you should in theory be able to say everything, but I think what I learned was there will always be a consequence to that. So the real question is this: is the price worth it? Now, you can't always know that the price might be a higher one than you expect, but you should sort of, every time you make a tweet that could be like a heavy hitter like that, you should sort of be making that choice in your mind. Like, right, there's a lot of bad baggage could come with this, could be a lot of mad inertia afterwards where it hangs around for a while. Is this worth it? And if it isn't, you shouldn't do it in that scenario. So I would say the one thing I've probably learned is I try to figure out the difference between just making a stupid joke or making one where like the point behind the joke, I think has some important value. So for example, some of the more recent things I've gotten in trouble for was never me saying anything. It was trying to say something like, can we have some leniency for this person who did say something, and then getting tarred with the same brush or told that, I'm normalizing it. So whereas in that scenario, I absolutely can stand behind every one of those cases, because I genuinely do believe that there needs to be people who have authoritative voices who say, I'm not in favor of like basically the most extreme punishment and of isolating all these people and making them all seem like they're the worst people ever. I think we should be fair to people. And unfortunately, being fair means being fair to people you don't like as well. Like that means even when it's the guy who's the arsehole, you have to give him equal treatment. That's not unfair to him.
Does it upset you when people call you a racist?
It should.
I'll offer my own experience on that. Yeah, it really does. And it's happened at times, where it's just like, you've got people in your life that have to read this, and you don't want them to sort of be questioning why people are saying this about you. And, because I've been, because I always try to kind of be like open with who I talk with and associate with to a certain degree. There's some personalities that are now just considered, as a matter of fact, to be considered racist. I think Milo's one. And I worked with him for a while and socialized with him. Never saw anything like that privately. But certainly some things came to light that definitely disappointed me. With some of the people he was associating with, people I would never associate with. But because of this guilt by association, because I'm in proximity to him, he's in proximity to them, people have said, well, Richard Lewis is alt-right, Richard Lewis is racist, Richard Lewis is a piece of shit. And I hate that. It's one of the worst things I think you can call somebody who doesn't feel that way. I can't think of many worse things than somebody that would be prejudicial towards another human being on the flimsiest of pretexts. I can't, I don't think of myself as a hateful person. I think it's really awful to sort of be perceived to be that way. So it's one of the things that I've really struggled with sort of coming to terms with, that because of, again, vague associations, because of 6 months at one publication, because I've taken stances that to me seem logical liberal positions, like freedom of speech or whatever. Apparently I'm normalizing or empowering. Like it's once people have a perception about you, it's incredibly difficult to change, and they will use every waking minute to continue to spread it about you. And it's not who you are. It's not the values you stand for. It's not what you believe. And that definitely has upset me. It's one of the worst aspects, I think, of having to, go out there on the internet and do my job and interact with people. So what about you? I mean, it sounded like you're just not fazed by it.
The thing is, it should be really bothering. I agree. It's the sort of thing that when people first say it, your reaction is like, what's happened? Like, how can people think that? Like, what have I done that's made someone think that? Like, and obviously that's half the problem when people get accused of something like that, is they spend half the time trying to defend themselves for something basically they didn't do. So as a result, you'll become neurotic. You start just becoming insecure about the topic, or you blow it up to be more than it is. I would just say the problem is, the reason I'm not that bothered is because it's another one of those terms that means nothing now. It just means it's a meaningless word. Like, I don't even know what it means at this point in time. As I say, a 12-year-old kid who in Call of Duty just screamed out the N-word is now treated as just as bad as someone who basically is literally plotting some sort of political violence to murder people in some fascist manner. Like, the idea there's no distinction between those two is a terrifying concept, that you could just be lumped in with that level of extremity, even though, if you know anything about my own actual life and my own personal values, I am against all forms of political extremism, especially all that arise in some sort of violence and or exclusion or killing of anyone, quite frankly, no matter what team you were on. Like, one of the things I hate in the most about being told I'm part of political movements is when I don't agree with any of the things in that political movement. It's not even like, it's not, I'm not one of those people who's like in a group where our group's sort of like post-rock music, but we're like, we don't like genres, man, don't put us in a box. Like, no, in this scenario, I'm like hip hop music and you're telling me I'm like classical music. It's like, no, I'm miles away from that. So that's frustrating, and it will always feel bullshit when people basically treat you in an unfair manner. Yeah, I agree that premise will always work. But luckily for me, I think one area that I'm good in that respect is I've always been someone who, whatever I say naturally, a lot of people it won't translate to, it won't hit, they won't seem to get where I'm coming from, and it'll be very easy for them to just think, he's an arsehole, or who the fuck's this guy, or even impugn some kind of aspect of like, he's arrogant, or he thinks no one cares. And so because unfortunately I always actually had that effect on a lot of people, I'm also kind of used to people by default not really giving me the benefit of the doubt. So in a sense, esports is just a more scaled up version of that.
I find it weird because, you yourself have been, in a position where you, I don't know, if you ever wanted to talk openly and earnestly about it, and I understand why you don't, you yourself could sort of frame, I think there's a little aspect of bullying that goes on, and I can never sort of articulate it because then I'll get called, fucking dick sucker, or whatever it is people like to throw at me, which apparently isn't homophobic when they're accusing me of doing it to you. And that is that, quite many years ago you tweeted on National Autism Day saying about, that you had your own difficulties with Asperger's, and basically it was a tweet that you put out there basically to say, listen, I've been pretty successful, I had a good work ethic, I managed to make something of myself in an industry that's very brutal and unforgiving and difficult to progress through. So don't let, if you have Asperger's or autism or any autism spectrum, issues, you can get to places too. And yet what I've seen that tweet, which probably is about as vulnerable as you ever let yourself be on the internet. I've seen that tweet just used to like constantly attack you. And people say whenever you give like a hot take that people disagree with, fuck him, he's autistic. And it's like, again, I'm not talking about outrage and condemning those people to the point where they're deplatformed, taken off the internet. But I don't think they realize how impactful, that is to actually say to somebody that does have Asperger's, right? And I totally get why you've never talked about it. But I guess that's what I'm sort of prompting you to do a little bit, is kind of open up about that, and whether, because you've said to me privately, if you could go back in time, you'd delete that tweet from the internet.
Oh, I almost certainly would, because like as you say, unfortunately, and this is just the way it is in the modern world, as long as people want to play the game of identity politics, it will be played. If you choose not to play, you are just playing a game that has no strategy and a losing strategy in someone else's game of identity politics. So in this particular setting, like you're saying, this would be the easiest way, the cheapest way that I could get out of all the problems we've just discussed that I've had in this interview, which are all based on making comments on the internet, is I could just say, well, you know what, guys, I have a learning disability, which means I have, difficulty understanding how other people perceive what I say. And so if you misunderstood what I said, I apologize for that. But, I couldn't really help it, just the way I am. And my brain works differently than yours. So I can even now spin it so that anyone who criticizes me is basically attacking me for being on some level disabled. I could spin it that like you're actually like, you're going to put off people who have these sorts of problems from entering our space. You're not inclusive. See, I could use all the same bullshit tricks that the other people do. The problem is, I think that that's like a bullshit mentality just for anyone in life to have. Like, in my opinion, whatever limitations you have, don't make them more limiting than that. They're already a limitation. So I take the limitation, do what you can to live around it, work around it. If you can, and this is very difficult, but this is probably the secret, find a way that the limitation can become a strength if you use it the right way. So in my case, I'm super into nerdy shit. I've built my entire career identity off being the nerd that knows the most about very specific niche aspects of games. So I have, even in a sort of way, managed to craft a career around something that seemed like it'd be what would limit me from having a career, because if I was doing something I wasn't that interested in, maybe I would be a terrible employee. Maybe I wouldn't have great work ethic. I don't know. So I would just say, like, first of all, I don't take it personally as a real limitation. It limits me in as much as it limits me. Everything else I would hope is myself and my own personality beyond that. And so I would never use that as an excuse. Like, it's not like I found out yesterday something was different. I have lived my whole life in this state. So as a result, like, I would hope I still know what I'm saying and what I mean by things. And I would still, quite frankly, I don't think that you should entirely get away with something just because you have an excuse anyway. Like I said, to me, it'd be a cheap get out. Like I would myself wouldn't even know when it was true. Like I have no control group. I never lived life with a different brain. So I can know if I would say that 'cause it's too edgy or if I did say it because I didn't know how people perceive me. I will say though, as you alluded to, probably the disappointing part and why I say I would go back and delete it. Because I don't have a problem that it's out there. But I will say it is some straight bullshit for anyone who is autistic that they live in a world where the only time it's referenced is simultaneously as a negative that somehow is derisory, even though that would explicitly be bullying someone for having a learning disability, which would not be behavior that the same people would themselves claim to promote. Even though they're simultaneously using it against you, they will also then do probably the most uncharitable thing, which is claim to know someone with that condition. And just from knowing that person, they can then be the one who is determining whether what you said could have been affected by that or not. So at the one point, you are a worse person because you have this problem, but it's never affected what you're doing in any way which should ever grant you some sort of compassion as a person. So I would say that angle, the reason why I have said publicly I would delete the tweet or I wouldn't make it is because I made the tweet, as you said, in the spirit of it was, if you're someone else out there with these sorts of limitations, don't let them be the thing that holds you back from everything. Don't believe that that limits you from everything in your life. You're getting a job, being popular, having a voice, having a figure. So I was trying to encourage people like that to almost like come out themselves, to think they could do it. Well, the problem is I have to say, I probably made it harder for myself by making that tweet. So to those people, I don't really know if I would advise it. I'd probably say just keep it under your hat and then tell the right people. I'd probably do it that way. Don't tell everyone. I'd say tell the right people who seem like they'll understand, because people who don't understand, they can use anything against you, mate.
Do you think it's ever had like an impact? I mean, look, again, I'm not looking for you to make excuses, but like I used to work in a school for children who were on the autistic spectrum. I know a little bit about it, and I think sometimes people do say, it just comes out, and there isn't a process before. Like me, I might sit down and think, right, I'm going to tweet something, and I'll type it, and I'll delete, and I'll type, and I'll delete. And what I'm doing is I'm going over like multiple permutations of how it could be received,
okay,
and all the different outcomes. But sometimes that might be something that, like you say, for somebody with Asperger's, there's pros and cons. They might not be able to sort of partake of that exercise. I don't know. I only can go on what I've been told and what I've read about the subject. So do you ever think it's been a contributing factor to some of the, more controversial statements or behaviors, or just in general in the way that you present yourself on the internet? Do you ever think it's a factor?
Well, like I say, I would definitely rank quite low my ability to know how other people will perceive what I say. So as a result, it's funny because obviously there are times when I choose to be very offensive. Like if I dislike someone who's fucked with me in the industry, I'm not exactly going to, in no uncertain terms, say that what I think to them and about them and very publicly. But the problem is, in that scenario, like I have free license in my mind to be as harsh as I want because that person's fucked with me. So what does it matter if they get mad from it? The problem I have is I'm usually putting so much of my own thought into what I'm saying, as in like, is this as accurate to what I'm thinking as the idea is? Is this the most elegant way to convey it? Oftentimes, I'm probably not as good at guessing. Like if you asked me with every 10 tweets that's even vaguely edgy, right? How many of these are you going to get in trouble for, or will there be any backlash for? I don't know that I'd be that great at picking the ones that would have the backlash. Like I find there's sometimes some I make where I'm shocked that nothing happened. And I'm like, oh, that was okay. Fucking hell, I thought that was a bit close to the line. Meanwhile, there are ones where you go, that was a bit tame. Why is everyone going mad over this? And it'll usually be one where you've made it a bit too vague and people could read in some sort of other implication, whether it be political or something, again, like something cultural you don't know about from that country or something. It's very easy for that things to go awry on those ones. So I would probably say I'm not as great at vetting them. Like if you really are thinking through 4 or 5 interpretations, you're way ahead of me on that one. I probably think like 2 and then I just go whichever's the funniest or whichever I'm feeling in the moment. And to be fair, I will say, like I said before, one of the things I don't think I'll ever get credit for is you don't see me complaining about a lot of the things I actually did that were fucked up that I got in trouble for. Where do you ever see me complain about that? Where am I crying about all the stuff that happened with Poland? I've told people, they don't know it, but at this point in time, I have legitimately lost the lion's share of like $100,000 in what I would have made from doing majors in Poland at this point in time. Like if you add up all the days I would have earned, all the events, like we're talking a lot of money here. But I never sit around crying, oh, why can't I do those events? I totally understand why I can't do those events. And I've never even thought for one more second of my life, like, I should be able to. It's like, no, that's happened. You can't put the genie back in the bottle on that one. Just leave it. I even often say, I even agreed with their decision to not put me on the event. Like in that scenario, if enough people are bothered by it, what's the point in making everyone upset from day one of the event? That doesn't make any sense, does it? So that's one thing I'll say people do seem to ignore is if I was this evil guy who's making all these terrible comments and is sort of somehow getting away with it still, wouldn't I at least reference things in the past and crow about them a bit more? And like, no, I basically never do that. I take them all on the nose if they're legit. If they're not, I might just say this is bullshit and I'm going to ignore it. But like, I'm kind of, I don't think the consequences are always fair, but I accept them.
So we can move on to more sort of pertinent topics in terms of what's coming up ahead. Obviously, you're somebody that's kind of been focusing a lot lately on expanding the kind of purview of your journalistic output. It's kind of moved a little bit, not just from being historical and editorial. There's actually been some more reporting that you've put out there in video format this year. So I wanted to just sort of talk to you about that, because I think when a lot of people talk about journalism, they very often say, oh, well, Duncan's not a journalist. He's a historian, or he's a polemicist, or whatever. But they don't seem to understand that those are subsections of journalism, that it's not just all reporting that you would do. Or investigative reporting or whatever. Why do you think you've chosen of late to sort of dip the toe back into the reporting water, which is something you used to do a lot of way back when in your early career?
I think one of the things I found interesting is people like you and me are in a really weird position, because it's funny, if we're ever trying to get sponsorship, obviously the term they call us now is influencer, like we're people with a social media following and with a platform and all these terms that almost make you want to throw up as you're even saying them and describing your own, I actually have a YouTube channel. No, mate, you have a platform and a broadcasting identity. It's like, but you have to live with this world, boys. These are the terms. Yeah. So anyway, when you have all that stuff, one of the things I think you actually realize is exactly that. Is like you can actually have quite a big influence over the community. And so one of the things I've tried to do recently is there are a lot of stories due to how big esports has gotten and how high the stakes are that some of the money invested is, that you'll just never get an official version of that story. Like me, you, everyone else will have a version that we could have written up, but we couldn't get the extra source on, or we couldn't confirm the figure on, and it will just die on our hard drives and we'll never get that information out there, even though a lot of people would be interested to know that now. So to me, where we can bridge that gap is if in places where you can't actually get the data out, you can't get the literal number of the player's salary, or you can't get someone on record to say they're the one who kicked the guy or recruited the guy or is going to do this move. The best you can get in place of that is someone who knows what they're talking about and can tell you, I can't confirm who, but I can tell you this is what's happening. I know what is going on, or even, and as long as they're clear about this, I'd speculate this is what's going on. With the information I have, which is quite a lot, of all the parties involved, I would speculate Team A is buying Team B for this reason, and they're going to do something else. Like in that scenario, I think that's actually quite an important role to have in the community. And if you notice at the moment, because it's hard to directly make money from that role, it has to almost be like a thing you do on the side with your other job. There's not many people can do it. And I look around the scene, and it's another area in my mind where I can correct the balance of fairness, so, for example, an interesting divide that I notice people never acknowledge with me and you is, since for so long, you've always been on the position, which was obviously very, very needed in the early days, of like players need more representation and support, and they're getting taken advantage of. Like, you're taking care of that admirably, mate. And a lot of people are. A lot of the early lawyers were into that. Even some of the team owners like Noah Winston were quite interested. But I did notice along the years, I mean, listen, it's sympathy for the devil, but who gives a fuck about the old team orgs, right? No one, right? They're always the bad guys in those stories. They're the guys threatening to take your house. They're the guys saying that they're not going to pay you the money, or that they're now paying you $200 to be benched to else. The problem is, because they are so often the arseholes, people now, I feel like, think that it's fine to be unfair to the team orgs. That suddenly they should have no profit margin, or they should have to give the player the maximum amount and let him dictate his own terms, his own whims, with no actual consideration for, like, for example, who I've sold the sponsors to and what region and what tournament they need to play in to fulfill that. Like, so instead, because people have gone too far the other way, I've also decided I want to be someone who can influence the community by showing the side of people who are tournament organizers or team organizations themselves, and the fact that, you know what, life isn't as rosy for them, or maybe they're having a tough time with where player salaries are going. So I just feel as though at the moment, like, the pundit role is a role that's very undervalued, because people only see it as a stupid talking Edgy saying a bunch of nonsense. But I think it can be a very valuable role, and there's just so few people who can do it right now. So I'm enjoying it. I feel like it's kind of a rewarding position to be in sometimes, especially when you are getting the bad guys occasionally.
Yeah, you know, I think I have noticed that you're definitely one of the voices that, you know, come out and speak on behalf of ESL, or, you know, come out and speak on behalf of a team. I think one of the areas where we were split was, like, for example, with that Sean Gers TSM thing. People have this assumption that we're always going to be on the same page because we work so closely together, which actually it's not 50-50 or anything. It's probably like 70-30, right? I think there's a reasonable split where we're going to disagree about stuff. It's just that it's never going to inform, you know, my desire to work with you, right? Because I think that's fucking childish.
It also just shows, right? It's funny because people don't realize, if anyone wanted actually a secret in esports, right? So we're considered people, by the way. I don't know if you've heard this rumor, but we're supposed to be unapproachable. Like, we're supposed to be intimidating people that, you know,
I didn't realize
are just arseholes out the gate. And, you know, if you like the premise that everyone who's just coming to esports wants to paint is we're the guy where, like, when the new people are coming in and they're trying to, like, lure them in, like, no, it's all right, come on into esports, it's all right. We're like, who goes there at my bridge? Pay the toll. Like, we're made out to be like that. But I'll give everyone a secret. Notice the way me and Richard actually talk to each other on shows, and you will see why we never have any massive arguments, because we do it in a tone where it is clear when someone's joking. You actually respect the other person's opinion, even if you disagree. You let them make their points. You make your counterpoints. You maybe have some back and forth, but the idea is, and I'm sure you can see this because it's something I've always loved about esports, is some of my favorite people are the people I don't really have a lot of opinions in common with them, but they're just such interesting characters. I also want to know what the fuck that guy thinks about something, or what angle he's going to go on. Like, I'm only half joking when I say that, like, I love the fact that Anders is somehow mentally ill, because whatever is wrong with him is brilliant. Like, bottle that. Fucking don't give it to other people, because you can only have one of those in the world at once. But I want to know his opinion on every stupid thing in politics, anything about UFOs or something. I'll instantly want to know what batshit take he's got on it, even though I will definitely not agree with any of it. It's brilliant.
No, it's true though. It's like that saying, isn't it? You know, too wild to live. What was it? I should get this correct. It's the Hunter S. Thompson quote.
Too weird to live.
Too weird to live and too rare to die.
Too
weird to live and too rare to die. That's what it is. You know, and Anders is definitely one of those. I
think
the
best people are, I think, in esports, mate.
No, but I think about all the relationships I have. All of my good relationships in esports now really started from a contentious position. You know, me, you, Scoots, Monte Cristo. You know, like we all, like, I struggle to think of a meaningful relationship in esports I've got, actually, where it was immediately positive right from the get-go. You know, it just doesn't work like that. You know, I think there has to be a certain degree of friction there, because you have to be your own people.
Sure.
Otherwise, it's boring. Like, why would I want to hang around with somebody that, like, literally their personality, like, just fucking tessellates with mine, like, just completely identical? Fuck that. It's silly. It's, you know, I want to talk. I'm like you. I like interesting people. It doesn't have to be fractious. It doesn't have to be arguments all the time. But I am very interested in people who have, like, different experiences and different takes on things and different ideas. And I might disagree with them. And sometimes, we might have an argument about it, but it's no drama. Doesn't have to mean, well, I can never. You know, I see this happening with a lot of streamers right now, where it's, well, you publicly criticized an opinion I had, so we can no longer associate. And it's like, grow the fuck up, dude. Like, you know, like, just put your ego to one side. It's like, you know, we break each other's balls all the fucking time. You know, it's funny. Who gives a fuck? But yeah, that seems to be a skill set that we're kind of losing just generally as people, I think, especially if you're mired in kind of like an online existence, right?
Sure.
It becomes everything that they say. Oh, is he subtweeting about me? And you get involved in arguments that you could really fucking avoid. But you know, on the flip side of that, I think me and Scoots have even had some Twitter flare ups since we've become friends. It doesn't fucking affect anything. Still getting a beer with fucking Scott next time I see him. Still hanging out. Still interested in his project. Still always going to be there for him if you ever need a favor. That's just how it is, man. Yeah, it's just weird. I gotta say, I think there's. Do you feel that we've kind of got to a worse place in terms of like I'll just keep it CS because that's the talent pool we kind of primarily interact with, right? Do you remember back in like Cluj-Napoca where we were all there? We had the famous photo of us all there, and people had even took pay cuts to get certain people there, and we were all just like, you know what? We came through a pretty fucking hellish tough event together, but fucking bros. We're all doing the Three Musketeer fucking hand stack and all that bullshit. I kind of feel we've lost, like as the stakes have got higher and the money's become greater, and I kind of feel we've lost a lot of that. Do you agree?
Well, put it this way, for a start off, that photo now is like that photo out of fucking Back to the Future where like people faded out of it and shit. Like that photo now looks dark, mate. If you go and watch it, like, it's almost no one working events from there. Like Fifth Lauren's on there, mate. Like, you know,
yeah.
This is
Fifth
like there's some fucking force ghosts in that motherfucker. So yeah, first of all, we've literally lost something, which is that there has been a decent amount of turnover in CS as it got bigger. Even people, by the way, who came from other games who came in who did good work here, you know. I would just say, unfortunately, this is the problem with when anything becomes an actual industry and a job, is you get people who do it for the sake of the job, or they have other goals, like, for example, money or fame or whatever, other motivating factors. Whereas I've always thought, if you go and look at that picture from Cluj-Napoca, the amount of people in that picture who would have also attended that event if they were getting paid a fourth as much is almost everyone. That's the level of passion we're talking about with that group of people. Like, most of the people in that group also are like former pros. They're people who've been in the industry 10 years. They followed all of CSGO. They were at all the events as a player or as talent or analyst or whatever. So like, these are people where they really still love Counter-Strike. One of the problems I think sometimes in the talent world I see is people only get hyped up by whatever the narrative is. So if the narrative is where it's the major or it's the world championship, yeah, they'll get excited then. But I've had some moments with some of the talent where it would be what I consider still a big tournament. And, it's like the quarterfinals and it's like the best team against the fourth best team. And I'm like, wow, well, let's get ready for this match. It's going to be fucking sick. And they're like, nah, who cares? Probably just be 2-0. And you go, no, what are you talking about? It's like a great matchup. There's all this. And what I realize is they're burned out, they're like, to them, they've become jaded on the concept of anything except a spectacle or like the game literally slapping them around the face. Like, this is a great match. Unless it's that, they don't really have some of the same drive for it. So I would say, on the one hand, some of them, they're doing a great job in terms of professionalism, and they've leveled up some of the like on-camera stuff. I think you see like the throws that people have and how they bounce off each other. Some of it's very high level now. They have taken that another step. But I do feel as though some of the like raw passion for the game, I think a bit of that's been lost. And I know you're not going to get that many people with super nerds like me who would watch the game for 20 years, but you'd hope a lot of them would be in the talent group. So I don't really know where you come down on that one, because I'd say it's across all esports games, not just CS as well, that I noticed that in.
So look, just to sort of start wrapping it up, let's just talk a little bit about kind of, where you're going to be heading next, because obviously I think there's going to be some time on the horizon. Like, you're getting older, I know you've said that you are less interested in doing events these days. That you only want to really do the big ones because the travel absolutely, just wears you out and it stops you creating content and stuff. The YouTube channel successful. You're still allowed on Twitter for now. But, I think there's going to be some space in the sense that I kind of feel that, maybe Overwatch is going to become less and less relevant. And obviously we're going to be getting like new tech, new opportunities. So what are you thinking about, what's going to be the next big thing that Duncan's going to kind of, put himself into and focus on?
Well, I've actually sort of hinted at it already. If you see the first couple of things I've done for Deserto for their video channel, where I've done a couple of documentaries.
Yeah, been doing documentaries, and voiceovers, yeah.
Like, basically, the reason I want to move into that area is anyone who knows my YouTube channel knows it has always been a hallmark that it's very lo-fi. And that is just literally because I had to learn all the stuff from scratch and I didn't have any clue how you edit a video. And then when I did edit the video, I don't know how you do nice cuts and put graphics in. Some of that stuff I still don't know to this day. It's never something I put my time into. Now, luckily, I somehow crafted a channel where you didn't sort of need a lot of tech, but that can only go so far. It did definitely put a lot of my videos in a certain box. Like, for example, if you've ever seen this is one of the things that really raised my eyes to this is sometimes people have taken videos of mine where I've got on a really good rant about, competition or practice or work ethic or something. And they'll take the rant part of it where you're going off on one and they'll just put it over like a bunch of random B-roll footage of players, celebrating the win in a match or like hard times in the game. And then all they do is put some cool, Hans Zimmer music behind it or something. And all of a sudden, what was already a nice little rant sounds fucking epic. It sounds like, holy shit. Like if I'd have actually written, like the whole joke there is I'm even watching it and I did write it, but I didn't intend it to be received like that. So even I'm almost receiving it in a new manner, like fucking hell, there's some power behind that. That was pretty legit. So I kind of want to do that sort of stuff. Like I've realized like it's something where not only is it needed, but again, it's something that I don't think there's that many people are sort of qualified to do. I think it's kind of like, it's a skill set I'm still learning. Like I'm trying to build it up so it's not just this, like I've started with my strong suit, the historical stuff, but I want to do some stuff basically that's kind of more like a short featurette you'd get on a TV broadcast where sometimes it can be poetic. You can be bigging up like the trials and tribulations of competition and what it means to be a champion or to come back from behind, or other aspects might be doing like profile pieces on players, but where I can have people who have way better editing skills than me really do draw all the footage in and the in-game stuff. And that's one of the things I'm working at the moment heavily, where I'm trying to help them sort of match those up more so that they're not showing the wrong sort of footage for the wrong sort of thing I'm saying. But I do feel as though that's an area where I think there's a lot of potential in that area. Like personally, I find it very interesting myself. And I also feel as though in the future, that's going to be the ultimate way for me to interest more casual fans. It's like if you can really nail the narrative and you can make it look really high-end, polished, nice editing, I think the impact that your ideas can have go further than when I'm just making, hopefully, a good point to the really hardcore nerds in one of my Thorin's Thoughts type videos.
I said it for ages. We don't have the ESPN 30 for 30 rates, yet in esports. Like, very few documentaries kind of hold up. And that's something I've been interested in. I really thought we were going to do some of that at Turner, and we just never got around to it. In the end, a lot of the content that we did do, where I thought it had like a lot of potential, it just never got used.
Yep.
I think that's a shame. But I also understand if you can't find a sponsor for it, if you can't make money off it,
yeah, of course, yeah,
you can't fucking justify the airtime. Right, because you're taking airtime away from something that could make you money. So obviously I understand it, but I think now with like private, the potential for like private online platforms, like it gets tough. I was looking at this thing that happened with Twitch with these sub only streams, and apparently if you put games behind a paywall, this is against the TOS of most games creators. Yeah, right. So I guess then would it be? Because I've always said, why don't we have like an ESL Netflix type thing, or better comparison is like a WWE universe. You pay X amount per month, you get access to every ESL VOD of every ESL tournament that they have throughout history. Well, I don't know if this puts the kibosh on that a little bit, because I mean, would they need to share some money with Valve? Would they need express Valve permission? I think that'd be a really cool feature. I'd definitely pay money for that. But then it's like, well, okay, maybe you can pivot. Why don't you commission and create 30 high-quality documentaries and make that the starting point? Because I'd probably pay a subscription fee to have access to really good, cool esports documentaries, like 100%. But yeah, I think I don't think people are really exploring that right now, and I think it's a shame. So maybe that is going to be a nut that you're going to crack. Who knows? So look, just to wrap it up then, it's been a tumultuous and turbulent year. Are you happy with everything that's gone? Have you been proud of the end of 2018, the halfway point of 2019? Is there anything that you would go back and do differently? Anything that didn't pan out quite the way you expected?
I think all in all, it's pretty good. Luckily for me, like I've literally just the way I am as a person, I have always operated on a day-to-day basis, as in literally each day I know exactly what I want to try and do that day, and I have an idea of what expectation should be considered success. Like you do a video, you do an article, whatever it might be, and as long as I am on pace for that, I always feel like things are great. I'll wake up tomorrow and do it again. I'm like, in that sense, I'm very lucky that I don't have to see a long path down the road with every step completed to feel secure. So I wouldn't say there's much that I would change. Like I maybe would have liked to have done like 1 or 2 more events. I think the ones I've done were really good ones, but there's a couple more might have been nice. Then again, the event circuit itself was in a weird place, so that's to be expected. And I've also kind of moved a little bit out of that world, so I get it. I'm not first on the Rolodex of the speed dial, as it were, when people go to hire the talent. So I think that's maybe the one thing. But as you alluded to earlier, to be fair, I've done all the normal events. Like I've had my absolute fill of doing just an average, could be any of 10 tournaments that are on the circuit every year. I want to do the ones that are really meaningful. Like I want to be an ESL1 clone because someone won the Grand Slam there. I want to be at the major because that's going to be a historic moment for someone's career, winning the major, maybe setting an era, maybe some legendary underdog run. Those are the tournaments you really want to do. So I would say generally I'm pretty happy with where I am at the moment. I actually quite like, as I alluded to with doing the documentaries, like some new horizons. I can kind of explore some of those aspects. Also, there's I actually find it kind of exciting what you alluded to about no one knows where Overwatch is, no one knows where some of these games are. I've always kind of enjoyed it when there's a turnover in the scene and you have a chance to pivot, or you can be the guy who gets in on the new ground in the new game. So I never worry about that too much of like it's going to limit my career or something. It'll just be a different step.
Yeah, a different step in hopefully a good direction. Any fears about CSGO dying off in the next year or two?
I would say, as perverse as this sounds, the fact that someone just tried to make us their really creepy, like sex slave a scenario of like exclusivity where we're only theirs and theirs alone and their eyes only. Like the fact that someone's that desperate for that, probably a good sign for CS, because you know what, Rich? I know the premise of gaslighting is so ridiculous that like we probably do overuse the term, even people who were against the original invention of that term. But one area I do feel gaslit as fuck is every bloody show I do that has an owner that has games that aren't CSGO, but also CSGO. They're telling me all day long about how CSGO loses the money, how the circuit isn't set up right, how it needs to be franchised, how we need to have the game developer take more of a hands-on approach. Won't get the fuck out of the game, of course. Must keep investing more money into the game. Must keep spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's weird. It almost doesn't add up, right? They hate everything about it, Rich, but they just can't get out of this bloody game. Meanwhile, some of the same people who tell you and me that, as you said before, turned down an Overwatch League slot. They said, no, thank you. I don't want to be in your big franchise league. Everything I've just said I want in CS, but they'll never explain how they can continue in CS. So what I'd say is, I think even though CS is a game where I know across the line, people just bleed money all day long, there's something about it and where it is in the industry and this unique position it's in with its open circuit that is interesting enough to some people that I think it's kind of the insurance policy. If all these franchise leagues don't work out, at least CSGO can still survive and pivot somewhere else. So for me, I actually think it's still quite vibrant as a game. Like I've no doubt it has to die out eventually, but it looks right now like it's still among the contenders.
Yeah, it's still doing really well. I'm super nervous about too many cooks in the kitchen, especially with other reports, people throwing, their hats in the ring to have more leagues, more tournaments. I guess I don't know if it's sustainable, but I guess we'll find out. But look, we'll wrap it up there. Pleasure to talk to you, even in a more formal setting than it is usually. And always great to get your thoughts about the industry and where you're going. I think we touched on some good subjects. So as always, appreciate your time. See you on the next episode of By the Numbers, of course, where we will be in a less formal environment and we'll be breaking people's balls and doing what we do. And there you have it, guys. That was an interview with Thorin, one of the biggest personalities in CSGO, somebody that I do a podcast with, and a great way to sort of kick off the Rivalry CSGO channel. If you want to place any esports bets or anything like that, if you're interested in following esports, go to rivalry.com. They're a great website. Proud to partner up with them. And stay tuned to this YouTube channel for more content like this. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.
It was pretty good, but the opponents sucked.
Yeah, kind of like a breakup. I mean, I think it should have almost felt that way in a sense.